Join me, Mark Windows, with Tony Hurst for Windows on the World Live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT at autonomousmedia.net.
Welcome to this edition of Windows on the World. Can't even remember what number it is, but it don't really matter, does it? And, pretty dreary day here for me. How's your week been, Mark?
Oh, it's been okay, Tony. Yes, I've just been up the coast here to visit a friend of mine, Pete, and he's got a brilliant website called boevat.org, and we're going to be talking about that, and it should interest a lot of people because it's all about penalty charges and how you can defeat them. So Pete set up a website, and it's the Bills of Exchange and VAT.org site, and it's using the Bills of Exchange Act and VAT invoices to defeat these, pirates, really, to defeat the pirates. So
okay,
Pete's going to be coming on the second hour, yeah. But in the first hour, we'll go briefly into the latest terror attack, the Lidl bag, which contained a bucket, which contained an alleged fiery substance, and they're now saying it was TATP explosive. But the whole thing, again, is a mixture of reality and unreality. And the way the media have portrayed it, of course, has brought in the unreality. So there's no change there. Yeah,
I was having a little chat with that to Chuck the other night, and it seems all a bit weird to me. But yeah, we'll have a little chat about that. I'm looking forward to Pete as well, because that's really one of the main bugbears in my life at the minute is parking tickets. I keep getting them in my own parking space. As you know, you've helped me out before successfully, it must be said. So I'm looking forward to getting into that and a few other areas about what it is they might well be doing now in terms of breaking laws even on these private land companies. So.
Oh yes, they set up their own association, a Parking on Private Land Association, which basically tries to rebut things like Dunlop versus New Garage. Anyone can look that up. That's just some case law which defeats those sort of charges, these kind of things that aren't fines, that aren't from courts, that carry no authority, but they're basically private invoices. And if you're going to charge somebody, then you need to actually send them an invoice. You can't just send them a parking ticket. Not those sort of parking tickets anyway. We're talking about the parking on private land here, parking eye, etc. So, yeah, we'll be getting into that. But I didn't really want to waste too much time on this, Tony, because I start to find these so-called terror attacks quite depressing now. And they've reached a new level of absurdity with a Lidl carrier bag containing a plastic bucket, and all as we saw of this was, of course, the tube door closing and someone saying that bucket looks like it's on fire, and everyone seemed to be paying absolutely no attention to it, and then a panic ensued, and it obviously did burst into flames. The thing is, we're not really being shown what it looked like after it had burst into flames, if it did burst into flames, but it's up to 30 people now who've been injured. I suspect most of those, though, are really people who've got trampled by these, probably it goes down to London Transport not saying, for instance, don't panic everybody, but we need to just leave the station orderly, rather than the guy was saying, get out, and it probably created the stampede. So it's probably Transport for London who created the panic. So, yeah, I'm just looking at this, and of course they've arrested an 18 and a 21-year-old, an 18-year-old was caught at Dover, and one of these boys was taken in by these foster carers. And yes, Kent police detained the teenager close to the port of Dover at 7:50 a.m. on suspicion of being a terrorist, describing it as a significant arrest. So there we go. I didn't really want to spend too much time on this, but what I found interesting about it was that Daily Mail on Saturday, September the 16th, the headline was "Web Giants with Blood on Their Hands. It takes minutes on Google to find plans to build this bomb, which brought terror to the tube. Now the Prime Minister is to confront bosses of Google." It says she will take on Google, Facebook and Microsoft after hundreds of commuters and school children narrowly avoided death when a bomb failed fully to detonate on a rush hour train. The attacker, who is on the run, used a fairy-like bomb that can be made from instructions still available online last night. The Prime Minister will host a summit with French President stroke banker's puppet Emmanuel Macron next week, and is expected to warn technology giants they need to do more to tackle extremism. So this is all a bit strange, especially with Trump coming on first of all in the morning there and saying after this attack that we should close down the internet. So obviously the narrative is being fed out here. And the one thing we can rely on the mainstream media to do is tell us what is going to happen. They're not very good at telling us what has happened, but they're quite good at telling us what is going to happen through these PR statements that they release.
Yep, I see it all being shut down, as I've said before on here and other shows. I've been saying it for nearly 5 years now. I've seen this coming a long while back, and my posts are still out there to prove that. They're just going to use that as more confirmation to go down that route that they're already doing. They're going to package it all up the internet, something similar to like your TV packages that those that are foolish enough to buy them get. And you'll get limited access to certain areas, but most of what's out there now is going to be burned by our modern-day book burners. Google, Amazon, and Facebook, Twitter, all of them, they're all shutting down. So, or shutting us down. That's their plan.
Yeah, of course, but that's the thing now, just finding alternatives, really. Basically form secret societies. I think that's what we should do, because it's getting a bit boring now. I mean, I don't want to be coming on every week talking about this stuff. I find it highly depressing. Yeah. And what we're here to do is try and find some solutions, maybe have a bit of fun finding those solutions. And I don't even want to take this event apart, Tony, because I started to look at it and my heart sank. I just thought, this is just nonsense. And then you've got that model with the bandage around her head, you know, for no apparent reason, and the policewoman who's wearing jeans. And then it's quite interesting, actually. There's a lady called Annie Logical on YouTube, and she does some quite good analysis, but she did point out that this one of the witnesses, called Richard Aylmer Hall,
that's right,
was actually involved in Livewire Digital, which is basically advanced research telecommunication systems, and they work with government satellite information systems and the European Defence Agency, and basically they get involved in setting up training exercises. So whether that's a coincidence or not, I don't know. And in a way, does it really matter? Because once we see the pattern of these things, and they're coming thick and fast, but I don't think that we've had anything quite as silly as this one. I don't mean it to be in any way detrimental to anyone who's hurt in it, because obviously people were hurt. But the point is, we don't really know how many, and we don't really know what from. I would say most of those people probably got trampled by the sound of it. And that's, again, down to the people in the station telling everyone to run away, you know. Yep. So, I mean, it is really absurd, and it's quite tiresome, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't really want to go into it too much more, but I will say this. One witness that I heard was down in another carriage, I believe. She heard all the screaming and the shouting and people saying run, but she didn't actually hear any explosion or see any of this fireball business that was reported. So I don't know whether it was there or not, but she didn't see it. She was there, I weren't. So.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that if you even threw something like a flare, you know, a yachting flare, into one of those carriages, and the train was just going to set off, people would have really, really bad respiratory problems. There would be a lot more burns than something like that. So it's kind of weird. Maybe it is some kind of, you know, teenager who's done it, but they said it contained nails and stuff. We're never going to know. We're never going to know what it was about. And again, are they changing the tactics here, and does it really matter? You know, does it matter whether they're using vehicles or little bags with buckets in or what? Does it really matter? Because it's just an ongoing thing. It's not going to be allowed to stop, and we know where it's going. So, yeah, we should probably be focused more on the solutions, I think, and that's what we're going to be doing in the second part of the show. And also, I'd like to go into it in the first part of the show, because a lot of this stuff actually goes into what truth is, you know, what is actually going on here, searching for the truth behind things. And that is really the golden rule of law. The golden rule of law is meant to be all about truth. And really it goes into the other things that we talk about, the post-truth world. We're in the post-truth world now. And the post-truth world is merely a situation in which people are more likely to accept an argument based on their emotions and beliefs rather than one based on facts, which is what we get from the media all the time. We get everything is based on emotion and belief and telling us things, making statements, but very little truth. And that's the main thing. So the way through all this stuff is really critical thought. Critical thought is the one and only thing that we've got. And basically, we've been programmed without foundation evidence. You know, it's very difficult to read between the lines of these events, but it's, as we said in the beginning, it's quite easy to see where it's leading us, and that's the most important thing. So, but this tendency, this post-truth, this situation which people are more likely to accept an argument based on their emotions and beliefs, has been exploited over centuries, but never on the current scale. And we've got to think about who's doing it. Well, the monarchy, financially led institutions, the government, NGOs, especially NGOs, actually. That's an interesting one, and something that tied into what we were talking about last week. Yeah, corporations and political organizations. Political organizations are great at this, to destroy truth and law. That's what they're doing, and replace it with fraud and deception. So this idea of truth and natural law is that which is inherent and coexists with nature. It's been destroyed by academia, economic fraud, psychology, especially psychology, and fake belief systems. And the fake belief systems we've talked about, that goes into a lot of this new age stuff, and also what's being promoted through this Agenda 21. And Agenda 21 is quite interesting now, because we're getting these bombs on a train, you know, and they're telling us that we need to get out of our cars. So something's kind of crossing over there. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect. I don't think we'll be seeing many more things happening on trains, because they need to get the public onto them and out of their cars. And that's something else I wanted to talk about tonight, because this policy is being enforced and it's all over the place. Transport for London, our little puppet there, sad little puppet show, Sadiq Khan, the corporate whore who basically licks the boots of anyone who's going to promote him. Well, he's right behind all this. And of course, we've got to walk, cycle and enjoy. We've got to find ways to get ourselves out of our cars. And what they're doing is they're saying that Londoners are really unfit and that's why we've got to get our cars. No, the reason you've got to get out of your car is because they're closing all the roads off. Why they're closing the roads? It's called Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and we talked about it. We've gone into great depth. And it should start to really hit home with people now, because it's becoming more and more obvious everywhere, every single part of London. Yes, it did start with 20 miles an hour zones, and then it goes into road closures, and then it goes into what we're seeing, which is lots and lots of building going on, high-rise flats, which are really, really expensive, and everyone being socially cleansed. So, yes, that takes us into something a lot more important. And the golden rule of law states that everyone's equal under the law and no one is above it. So that's what we have to enforce. We have to actually enforce that now, I think, actually start ramming it down people's throats who are taking away our freedoms. I mean, they work for us. And we've got these horrible puppets like Amber Rudd telling us all sorts of propaganda and nonsense week in, week out. She's basically working for lobbyists, and they all are. So really, it's kind of down to us, isn't it? Because we're accepting it. Why are we accepting it? I don't really understand. Because aren't they public servants? I thought they served us. That was their job, you know. So basically, yeah, truth. What is truth? Let's have a look. The root is the word origin of a fair number of English vocabulary words, including verdict and veracity. The root ver is easily recalled through the word very. For when something is very good, it is truly good. Well, that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. So something is true if it's in accordance with fact or reality. So how much fact or reality are we getting through the media from this event last week? The one we've talked about, the little bag with a bucket in it. How much actual fact and reality are we being given? We're not really being given very much at all. In fact, I would say we've been given 30% of something, which is mainly incomplete. So what we're getting some, on a scale of 1 to 100, probably about 5% of information, which we cannot verify. We can verify very, very small amount of that. So, yeah, so a fact, what's a fact or a belief? A fact can be a belief, because if something's true, it can be believed. That's basically truth. And one thing that's missing, I think, one thing that's really missing is the idea of an oath. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people don't like oaths, and Jesus said you should never really swear an oath. But what I mean by an oath is to your higher self or a higher power. It doesn't really matter, but it's basically a way of getting yourself to be true to yourself. And that is the problem with 99% of what's coming through the media and what they want to do to us. They want to make it so that we can't trust ourselves. If you can't trust yourself, you can't trust anybody. So this is a really, really interesting thing, I think. So let's go have a look at Hebrews 6:16. This is in the original, I think it's probably from the King James, actually. Hang on, no. This is interesting because this is a pre-King James quote. Then I'm going to give you the King James quote. And the reason I'm talking about this is because it's leading up to what we're going to be talking about in the second hour, believe it or not. Because if you're true to yourself and you have belief, then you can defeat untruth. And that's the whole point. Even with things like parking charges, you have to be true to yourself. You can't chicken out. You can't go halfway. You have to know what you're doing. So it says here, people swear by something greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to argument. Well, that's quite interesting, isn't it? So our oath should really be to our higher self. The King James Bible removes the importance of the oath. That's interesting. It says, for men verily swear by the greater, and an oath of confirmation to them is an end to all strife. So that's slightly different, isn't it? Verily swear by the greater, and an oath of confirmation is to them an end to all strife. So those trusted to be in office swear an oath. So the police do, public officials, and anyone who serves you, including, of course, those in government and the Queen. And so that's an interesting thing. We were looking at the oath of constable years ago, and why weren't they sticking to it? Well, we know why that is, because they're corporate employees. They are not officers in the sense of an ecclesiastical position. They're officers in the sense of a corporate position. So all ministers, monarchs, officers, administrators, trustees, they're all under oath. The different types of law have evolved. This is very interesting as well, because when we talk about common law, that's a very, very big area, common law, and common law can actually go into administrative law. But we've done many shows on this sort of thing, and how the sort of law of the sea, this admiralty law, took over from about the 12th century, actually. They were using the admiralty law in county courts. Admiralty law is a form of commerce. So basically, one of the big reasons why we have this military-industrial complex and endless war on terror is because of this. That's all it's about, really. We're talking about a commercial running of the country. So the national security of the country is commercial. That's all it is. It's all in commerce, isn't it? So it's very interesting how laws evolved into these different strands. So you've got all this called commercial brands of law, and they are brands of law, really, because they're all about business, and they are business brands in a way. That's what, and the county court kind of advertised them and put them into this kind of private area where people can have things taken from them, and they're not even having proper court cases. We've discussed this for many years. And so why did all this come about then? We have to think about that. Well, it probably came about because there's a big difference between oral testimony and written testimony. And when something's written, then it can be changed. When something's oral, it had to be remembered and accepted in the moment. And then it would be repeated, but it couldn't be changed. So that was the whole point of it. So when we got into the Roman system and the administrative system, what we're seeing now is the fraud that's created by the fact that people don't take oaths and there's no oral testimony. That's kind of an interesting one, really. So it brings us then into natural justice, which, according to our great learned legal system, is natural justice, English legal system doctrine that protects against arbitrary exercise of power by ensuring fair play. Now, what I can say about this is there is no natural justice anymore. There is none. It doesn't matter what level you're at, whether it's bureaucratic, kind of administrative courts, or even criminal. Natural justice does not exist anymore, and that's probably what we should be thinking about to bring back. And there have been, over the last many hundred years, there have been societies set up that have tried to do that, including, of course, the legendary Rosicrucians. Now, the Rosicrucian thing is quite interesting because in some ways I think it was just I think it was an experiment, really, and I think it's just an experiment in how to publicise things. It was very successful at that. One day I'd like to do a show on that, on the Rosicrucians, and it has been hijacked. I mean, for instance, in 1931, this guy in Mount Shasta, California, he formed another version of the Rosicrucians, but these are all fake. They're not the real thing. The real thing was probably more to do with Francis Bacon and several others, and they're very interesting. But these guys were really talking about the beginnings of Freemasonry, and we know where that leads. That leads nowhere. That leads into a kind of allegorical universe of nothingness, which nobody seems to learn anything from, but people get trapped into, and they end up doing favors for people that they might not ordinarily do favors for. So, for instance, you've got the police when... this is apparently from many years ago. A friend of mine got in trouble with the police, and he knew a lot about the way that they kind of they basically, you get into this thing which is a secret society. So in other words, the police are encouraged to beat the public up when they join, so that, in other words, they are part of the problem, this kind of gang, and also they can be blackmailed, and they have things that can be used against them. So that's how it works, and that's pretty much how Freemasonry seems to work in these secret societies, the ones we know about. But the funny thing here is that if it's a secret society, we wouldn't know about it. So that's an oxymoron. So Freemasonry isn't a secret society, is it really? It's, as they say, a society with secrets. Yep. So I think these real secret societies that people had to be asked to join, and nobody could apply to join, are quite interesting. The idea of the Rosicrucians, for instance, that could be a good template for a sort of underground movement at the present time of people who are actually trying to restore natural law, because that's what these guys were trying to do, allegedly, originally. You know, it was all about that sort of thing, and bringing back some kind of philosophical decency to the world. And they thought they were the people to do it because they'd read a lot and they spent a lot of time on their own, and they kind of conversed with each other at very irregular intervals. And it's all legend, but very, very interesting. So, I think what we've got to do is get back to a bit of natural justice, really. And these principles apply to decisions of all governmental agencies, tribunals, judgments of all courts, which may be declared to be of having no effect, ultra vires, in other words, if found in contravention of natural justice. Now, when things are ultra vires, that's very, very interesting. And we've gone into that with court orders, in other words, void court orders. And if you stick to your guns there, you can have some success in the lower courts that can make things go away. The void court order. When is a court order void? We've got it on windowsontheworld.net, but look at that. There's an article by a woman called Shirley Lewald, and it basically outlines what is a void order from a court. And once you get into the higher courts, those things can be used. Obviously, lower down the pecking order, where we're talking about these predatory bailiff companies and debt collectors and general criminals and land pirates, then they try and ignore that. But once you uncover the fraud that's happened in, say, like the county court, you can go to the next stage with it, and that's where it gets much more interesting. So brings us back to natural law. So is any of this resonating with you, Tony, so far?
Yeah, sure. So down the roads I want to go down, for sure. So keep going.
Yeah, I think so, because natural law is based on observable truth. Yes, it's the English law system, the doctrine that protects against arbitrary exercise of power by ensuring fair play. Now, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a show with you, Tony, all about what happens in the Crown Court in this country. And it's very, very interesting. It ties into what I've been reading about for several years. And that means that recourse is being taken away within the system. So it's all about liability. We've talked about this a lot. For instance, I recently complained about a judge and I got an email back telling me I was a customer. How does that work? Very interesting. Be interesting to see what comes back as well, because I've made some very serious allegations about a particular High Court judge, and it's all true. So there's a lot going to be coming up in the weeks to come, because it's made me examine not just the CPS and the police, but the whole court system, and indeed the bar society, the law society. And out of this, there should be some resolution. There should be something that we can learn from all this, because it can't just be that all of our remedies are taken away. They can't just take remedy away. The actual system we're in doesn't quite allow that. The only reason the system allows it is because of the administration within that system. For instance, say in the Crown Prosecution Service, you can write to them and you have an absolute right for the information that they are meant to give you if you're a witness in court. Recently, I was told that I wasn't a witness in court, even though I gave testimony in front of the judge and 12 jury members and, of course, everybody else that was there, and it was on the court record. So it seems to be that if you are a defence witness, then you're not really wanted. They like prosecution witnesses. They tend to prefer them, and they prefer to basically accept prosecution evidence over defence evidence, and that came out in this article. So there's a real imbalance going on here. What it means is really is that the police are assisting the Crown Prosecution Service in creating and promoting crimes. That's actually what it means. That may sound a bit over the top, but that's actually what happens. It means that things that would never have got to court with the defence evidence presented to the CPS aren't being presented. So they're basically presenting one side as though the prosecution is the only side. And that's getting into Napoleonic law. Basically, we have to prove ourselves to be innocent or not guilty, because we can't be innocent, because in this system it's all about original sin. So you can never be innocent. You can only be not guilty. Yeah. And that goes down to guilty mind, intent. So it's all very interesting stuff, this, and once you get your head around it, it starts to make sense, and it gives you a lot of confidence. Whether that is going to be acknowledged by the bent criminals in the court, though, is a different thing. However, it gives you the confidence to know that you are right within the system, and the system is there to serve you. You don't serve the system, it serves you. That's what it's there for. So you have to make the system work for you. And the way it seems to be at the moment is that you have to complain against all of these bent people who are running the court system and everything else, really. You know, the...
Complain? Is that the right term? Should we not...
A complaint, yeah, to bring a complaint is quite serious. A complaint, you see, that's what it says in your council tax, Tony, isn't it? A complaint has this day been raised against you, because they have to pretend that those are real court summonses, even though, of course, we know they're not. They're printed by the council. And I was talking to Kenny Williams about this, because he went down a pretty parallel road to me. And we did an interview. It was weeks ago now, but we've been so busy with these radio shows, I haven't actually had a chance to put it out. But Kenny went all the way with them, and he went to the police and he reported it as fraud. And, of course, the police won't report it as fraud because they are part of the system, which is the council and all the rest of it. And fraud is criminal, after all. Fraud is serious. So they've got a major problem, because the whole country runs on financial fraud. So you can't go prosecuting people for financial fraud unless they're very small people. Like, you know, if you're going to get somebody who's committed a small fraud or even a benefit fraud or something like that, they always hammer those sort of people. But they don't really hammer gentlemen fraudsters who are sort of defrauding or moving about millions, you know.
Yeah, and the courts and the council and the police, they're all intrinsically tied together, and they've got the same need, which is to make money, first off, and secondly, not to get discovered for what it is they're doing. But I want to know, why, how are police allowed to not give defence evidence, not hand that in? Surely they're under an obligation, a legal obligation, for full disclosure.
Well, they are, but it doesn't mean that they're going to take any notice of it.
Okay, yeah, I know. Well, none of them are taking any notice of any of the laws at the minute, are they? In most circumstances, a lot of what I've seen over the last few years, some individuals are having some success with certain methods that I know we're going to go into at a later date, but it's all getting quite serious, really, isn't it?
Well, yes, and the case I'm working on at the moment is one of the most serious things I've ever seen, and the impact it's had on me and other people is extremely serious. In fact, it's as serious as it can get without people getting killed. So it's the next stage down from that, but it's about ruining lives, it's about absolute corruption, and it's about complicity in that corruption with people who should know better because they've sworn an oath, which takes us back to what we were talking about at the beginning. So all of these people under oath are going against their oath of office. So they're acting in a way which is against their oath of office, and they are ecclesiastically bound because an officer is an ecclesiastical position. It goes back to the church, really. It goes back to upholding everything that's right, and it's really a religious position. So what they've done very cleverly is put the most corrupt people in the highest office. And what does that do? Well, that means that it corrupts the entire system. So once the entire system's corrupted, then basically you've got people under control because they have to start becoming corrupt themselves. So once that the public have been corrupted, then they've got no hope, because they cannot rely on the truth within themselves anymore, because common law, natural law, is all about the truth. It's about the absolute truth, which is something which again goes back to the oath, which is of a higher power. So if you've got people who've never sworn an oath who can't tell the truth, then you've got a major problem. And that becomes part of the system. So the system then becomes completely degraded, and that's what we see. We see these bent bailiff companies, we see these parking companies, we see everyone just trying to rinse as much out of the system as possible. And the government are allowing that to happen because ultimately it's good, because under the global governance scheme, the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 plans, that's what they want. They want absolute control. And the way you get that is to break everything down and make it so there's no remedy within the system. So part of this idea is to use the remedies that we know we have, and we can use them like bullets against these corrupt officials, because when people are made accountable, they tend to run away. It's very strange, isn't it? Because I thought under the law system, when we were made accountable, we stood up to the law and we told the truth. But that's not what happens. It's the opposite now. So, I think what we should do is bring in Pete, because Pete set up the website, boevat.org. I've known Pete for several years. We've had lots of conversations about this, and I think it's a great idea, and it'll give people a lot of confidence once they start to understand this process. So are you with us, Pete?
I haven't called him in yet. I've just sent him a message
Tony,
to see if he was ready there. So,
okay.
Hopefully he's ready. Make sure his radio's turned off, but I'm not getting a response yet.
Okay, well, I'll carry on. About an oath. You see, the oath, the affidavit, which is the highest form of truth on paper, and it has to be, it's really an oral testimony, an affidavit, because it can be spoken or written. But when it's written, it's signed under oath, so you have to swear to it. And some people don't think swearing oaths is a good idea, but as I said, I think we're talking here about your higher self. In other words, why would you perjure yourself? Why would you lie against yourself? That's the point of it. Yeah. An unrebutted affidavit is the only truth in a matter. And affidavits are very powerful. That's why the court don't like us using them anymore. They make you a witness rather than somebody who's speaking an affidavit, swearing testimony, basically. A first witness statement is what I was told I could give when I had a bankruptcy petition served on me by Waltham Forest Council through the Royal Courts of Justice. I was told that they didn't take affidavits. The reason they didn't take affidavits was this was not a real matter in a real court. It was an administrative process that's not done in the court, and that's very, very important. So what they're trying to do is remove the court from the actual bankruptcy there. They're using it as a lever to get you to pay up. But on the contrary side of that, there is also the fact that you can now have a private company being your trustee in bankruptcy. They will be appointed as trustees in bankruptcy for your estate, private companies. What could possibly go wrong? So in other words, the insolvency service, that's an oxymoron, isn't it? The insolvency service,
yep.
Yeah, they hand over your estate in trust to a trustee in bankruptcy under a private company. Now, what could possibly go wrong there? It couldn't be possible that they would just steal your entire estate, could it? Yeah, well, that's actually what happened to a friend of mine, and that's what's happening to many people. And it's all being allowed to happen by our government who work for us. So why are they allowing it to happen? Why is the judiciary in this country aware of it and allowing it to happen? Because the people at the top are absolutely bent. And, of course, it's the military-industrial complex. It's about the financing of the country. So there is no depths to what these people will do to take money off you. And they're allowing it to happen on every level. So that takes us into...
Okay. We've got Pete joining us now, but there's just one thing I wanted to add before you introduce him properly to that. Are oaths often sideswiped by people like judges when they do these council tax things, swapping their role? In other words, they're not acting as a judge anymore when they do that.
Well, those courts are private anyway, so it doesn't matter whether there's a judge or not. They're administrative. So basically, you're just there to be administered against. What you have to do is create a controversy. In other words, that the council tax, not that the council tax is unlawful, because you can't do that because it goes back to the poor laws and you're a pauper. So there are ways out of that.
Yeah, but about the oath, are they getting out of their oath by changing their role when they do that?
Not necessarily, because there's a thing called the Farley ruling, Lord Farley of Birkenhead, which meant that the magistrates could not challenge a liability order. And that goes into areas not just for council tax, but other government agencies. So basically, it meant that the magistrates can be under oath, but because their oath is obviously to the Crown, and they're working in a private capacity. They may not know they're working in a private capacity, but they are instructed that unless you can bring forth a controversy with the amount, which is what you have to do, you have to dispute the bill. You have to actually dispute what they're giving you. And if you do that, then you'll get a hearing in a council tax court. Otherwise, it's purely administrative because it's not really a court. But what you can do is you can bring it into the court. That's what I think is the important thing here that people miss sometimes, is that these so-called private rooms that they hire, they can be used as courts, but only if you enforce your rights. You have to enforce your right to use it as a court. Otherwise, they will just administer against you.
Uh-huh. Okay, cheers for that. All right, Pete's here. You might want to introduce him. And Pete, could you please turn your speakers down a bit, please, buddy?
I've got earphones on, so yeah, you should be all right. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, that's great. Okay, Pete. Yeah, well, I met Pete several years ago at a festival. I think it was which one was it, Pete?
Heart of the East.
It was the Heart of the Yeast.
Yeah, Heart of the Yeast. Yeah.
And then at the Green Gathering, which we've been subsequently banned from. I think you were there as well, weren't you?
I was at the 2013 Green Gathering with you, Mark. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this stuff over the years, and Pete's come up with a great website called bovat.org. And basically, it's all about defeating these petty-minded tyrants who want to attach bills to our cars when we haven't actually got into a position where we owe them any money. So, Pete, could you tell us a bit about why and how you started it?
Yeah, well, when my brother actually phoned me up and he said, a friend of mine's got a parking ticket. He says, you've got some information on this, and asked me, because he knew I had some contacts in the awakening sort of movement. And all I did was, I think I said something to him like, well, why don't you have a look at the Bills of Exchange Act? Because some of my friends are looking at that. And Richard's got this analytical mind, and he's not a great reader because he's slightly dyslexic, but when he does read something, he hyper-focuses on it. So he read the Bills of Exchange Act from cover to cover, basically. And he formulated a letter which we've then subsequently improved on over time, and we've come up with this, what we called the Bills of Exchange and VAT, because the whole thing really hinges on the VAT argument, because they can't charge VAT on nothing. So it's rather difficult to get that message across to people, really, because they just don't get the VAT angle, really. But the thing is about the VAT angle, which was introduced into the Bills of Exchange Act, I think by Dennis Healy, wasn't it? I believe a long time ago, and at that time, it effectively brings HM robbing you and customs in on our side against these bandits.
Absolutely, and that is what's called a remedy, isn't it? So the remedy is there. Yeah. In a way, the remedy is there within law for most things. However, we have the remedy blocked. But in this particular case, because it's commerce and they work in commerce, they exist in commerce, they are creatures of statute, it will work because you're actually hitting them with the law. Can you explain a bit about that, Pete?
Yeah, well, what it is that the difference, what a lot of people get confused with is they call these charges, they call them fines when they're not. It is not a fine, it is a charge. And as a charge, it is subject to the Bills of Exchange Act. A fine can only be issued by a court of record and then only after due process, right? So what these are they've got lots of different names, penalty charges or parking charge notices, loads of different things. Even the litter bandits are handing them out now. And but they are charges and they are subject to the Bills of Exchange Act. So within the Bills of Exchange Act, you have the right to require, and that's an important word here, you've got a right to require a proper invoice, a signed invoice from the person making the charge, and they have to make that signature. Once you've required it, they have to either cancel all charges or provide you with a proper invoice, and that's it. You've checkmated them, because that whole business is predicated on what I believe to be a giant fraud.
Absolutely. Yes, it states in the document that I require a properly formatted invoice, fully compliant with the Bills of Exchange Act 1882, for your charge or demand or order, which is required to be legible and to include the following features: your company name, number, and trading address, the date of the invoice and the date by which the invoice is to be paid, a full description of the goods and or services supplied or provided, and the cost therefore, i.e. what of value has been exchanged, the consideration, which is obviously contractual. All contract has to have consideration by both parties. Account for VAT, be it 0% or otherwise, and show your company's VAT registration number. If you are exempt from VAT, state it clearly on the invoice. I need to account for VAT. Now, this is a very, very important point, isn't it, Pete? Because what you're doing then is bringing them directly into the firing line of government as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you're bringing them into the firing line of not just government, but HM Revenue and Customs, who...
That's what I meant, Pete, yeah.
Yeah, who really, they don't even need a warrant to come in and take away your computer equipment. So if they've messed around with that side, they've not just broken the... they've not just committed an offence or several offences under the Bills of Exchange Act, but they're probably also committing VAT fraud, which is which is a big no-no, really. It's probably unlikely that the government would actually come down on them, because I believe they're all in the same sleeping bag myself. But it's that they've got to be seen to be doing the job that they're paid to do, that sort of thing, you know?
Well, absolutely. This is the whole point, and it is a facade. That's why they call it legal fiction.
Yeah.
Because we're operating with fiction, and this is where the whole financial system is. And this is the thing that a lot of people like us started to understand and then expanded on, because I think this is the big problem, is that people are scared of authority, one.
Yeah.
Two, they're scared of loss. And three, they're not aware of how the financial system actually works. And the Bills of Exchange Act brilliantly describes that. And it is quite complex for some people. I understand that. There's people I know have a real problem getting this. But really, it's all about, it's a bit like bring forth the body, That's the whole point of it. I mean, if I owe you something, then you have to be able to describe. I have to describe what it is, when you had it, what you paid for it, and what you got. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. And that's really what we're doing here, isn't it? It's just accounting. What you're doing is you're just bringing accountability, or just accounting, into the situation. How do we account for this? You've issued this ticket. You've issued this assumption. But where did you pay out the money that you're charging me? And what percentage of that money is going to administration? What percentage is for the loss? What did you lose, etc.? So an invoice is brilliant for that, because all you're doing is asking them for proof of the service that you've had. Because if they're charging you, there has to be a service as well, doesn't there? It has to be. They have to have actually given you something.
That's the crux of it, and also the reason that the BOVAT method remedy is so powerful is because the Bills of Exchange Act is the bedrock, and has been the bedrock, of business to business transactions since 1882, and it is, if you go to most businesses now, like you go to building suppliers and you order some building supplies, you will get an invoice. You'll get a proper invoice with it. And business to business are invoicing each other all the time. It's standard practice. But the Bills of Exchange Act also protects you as a private individual, as a private person, if for those of you that know what the distinction is. It protects you as well. Exactly the same. So it is no different. But the real big thing is that it is bigger than the massive revenues brought in by these parking bandit companies, because it is not only the Bills of Exchange Act, it is VAT, and VAT is enormous, and there's no way that they'll stymie that in favour of a parking bandit company. So it's checkmate, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had this years ago with, I think it was Euro car parks, but I never bothered paying them. I mean, I knew they were unenforceable. I think what they're trying to do now is make them enforceable. This is the thing, though, Pete, isn't it, about the government? I mean, they are allowing these cowboys to rob the public, and they are not only letting it happen, they're condoning it, because they are actually now bringing in cases where people are losing against these land pirates in court. And mainly what it is, I think these cases are just there to make the public think, obviously, oh God, we haven't got a chance, we've got to pay it. But it's scaremongering, really, and there's no real basis to it, because when you read these things in the paper, they always say due to a loophole in the law. There aren't any loopholes in the law, are there, Pete?
No, I personally think that there is one case, I won't mention the actual name, but there is one case that often gets quoted by the parking bandits, and it's my personal opinion, my gut feeling that was set up.
Yes, well, we know how easy it is to set things up in the courts.
And I have explained to you, Mark, privately how I feel about that and how I justify my thoughts on that. But I won't expand here, because it's it could put me in a mess, couldn't it?
Well, this is the thing, but the point is that we learn from this stuff and we get the information out. So it's the information that comes out of it that's important. It's not the original controversy. The original controversy is just the eureka moment usually, isn't it? That's when you go, right, I think this is wrong. I'm not going to pay it. Well, actually,
controversy is a good word there, Mark, because that's what we are actually removing when we do the BOVAT notices.
Exactly.
And, we are removing controversy. We're actually removing any controversy by which they can bring us to court, because we're not saying no, we're not going to pay. We're saying we're happy to pay. Put it in an invoice, and I'll pay it. Because under the Bills of Exchange Act, you're under no obligation to pay unless they provide you with an invoice. Again, it's checkmate.
Exactly. So for people who may find this slightly confusing, they've gone into, say, some supermarket car park, they've overstayed, and they've got a parking ticket, a parking charge from Parking Eye or one of these other groups. Now, how does what you're telling them work? Can you explain it in a kind of simple way?
Well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to claim that you have a contract. Well, you don't have a contract. Driving onto a piece of land does not a contract make. I'm sure there's plenty of information on what comprises a contract. In fact, Mark's already touched on it already. There has to be a consideration, and there has to be a private agreement to the parties, and then there has to be performance. It has to be performed, and then at the end of it, there's a settlement. So that's what a contract is. And if it's missing any of those things, it's not a contract.
That's right, and that's a big disclosure from both sides as well.
Yeah, and some of them with Parking Eye, one particular one that I'm aware of, is sometimes on some parking areas, and they always work on places they don't own for a start, so they're just kind of agents. They expect you to punch in your car registration in some machine in the store. Now, I believe that if you do that, you are then contracting with them, because you are meeting their terms and conditions by putting your number in there. So it could possibly be argued that you have contracted with them at that point, right? This is what I believe.
Yes, makes sense.
But there is no barrier, so you haven't paid to get in. You see what I mean? Now, if there's a car park and it's got a barrier and you pay to get in, then you're accepting the terms of that car park. You are contracting. But if you've, for instance, you've paid to get in and you've parked over two lines because some idiot parked in his thing and you've parked, and then he's driven away and you're still left there exposed, and they slap a ticket on you, that's a different thing altogether, because they're trying to say now that you've contracted with them, you've accepted their terms and conditions, and you have parked over. So what I say to that is, okay, I've contracted with you, so give me an invoice. It's still, it doesn't matter whether you've contracted with them or not, you're still entitled to an invoice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a very good way of tidying things up, isn't it? So you're putting it into a legal framework, and you're putting it into a statutory framework as well. And you're putting it into a financial framework. In other words, you're making the government happy. And of course, they can't argue with that, can they? Because all that you're doing is trying to basically business. You're creating you're creating the tools for the perpetuation of, or perpetuity of, business transaction, which is your legal responsibility as a person, isn't it? You say,
yeah, and each time you offer a BOVAT notice, each time you send a BOVAT notice, and always do it undersigned for delivery, so that you've got proof that it was actually delivered. But every time you do that, you're giving them an opportunity to cure, and that puts you in honour and them in dishonour if they don't do it.
That's right.
So, do it a couple of times by all means. Send them BOVAT notice 1, send them BOVAT notice 2, and once you've sent BOVAT notice 2, after that, the next step possibly is to send them a cease and desist, because that at that point they're in dishonour because they haven't met the terms of your notice.
Absolutely right. So it's basically what you're doing is you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's because they have failed to do it. And this is where I learned quite a lot about this sort of stuff with things in the lower courts, and especially with things like council tax. We can go into that a little bit later because there's quite an interesting one that I took to court, and it affects everyone in the country actually. Hundreds of thousands of people can get robbed of their discount on council tax by a private company, and I proved that they can't do that. They have to actually go back to the original agreement, which was with the council, because the council have an implied contract with you, because this goes back to the poor laws, and we've talked about this a long time ago and on many shows. It's worth reiterating because I think this is where people become a bit unstuck. But when you're talking about something like this is really absolutely the way things should be done in their own system. So all you're doing is you're removing a controversy, and you're basically bringing forth lawful remedy. And they don't like it, though, do they, Pete?
No, they really don't. And at first, I mean, it really confuses the robots. What I tend to do, by robots, I mean the organic robots that work for them, basically people that just stamp letters and send them out without any real conscious idea of what it all means. Lower functionaries, and I kind of lost the train of what I was going to say, but I think what I really try and do is I will try and target the CEO of that company and send it direct to him. Now you can do a little bit of searching on Companies House, and I've put links on bovat.org.uk. I've put links in there. If you read the whole thing, then you'll probably be armed for the fight you've got ahead of you. And I will say at this point that the only people who fail with this are the people who give up, or the people who get frightened by their scary letters. Everyone who's stuck with it has beaten them. You don't always get closure, but you always get to a point where it exhausts their effort as well.
Yeah, that's right. And those scary letters, once you've had a few thousand of them, they're not really scary anymore, are they? I mean,
well, they're not. They're specially designed letters, probably by psychologists, to trigger fear responses within you. And as soon as some people see the letter court in red letters, they've got one that says letter before court action. I'm sure some of the listeners will have seen that. And that generally triggers the fear response, and people will reach in the pocket and start paying at that point. Well, if you go belly up and pay it, then more fool you, because once you've served the BOVAT notice on the company, technically you're committing fraud if you pay it after that point.
Well, that's absolutely it, because you put up a very good point there, that when you do this stuff, if you're going to do it, understand why you're doing it. If you don't understand why you're doing it, don't do it. Just pay it.
That's really good advice, Mark. Yeah.
Well, it's about being competent, isn't it, Pete? It's about competence, and competence means that you are looking after your own affairs and you're not causing controversy, harm or loss, or creating a fraud or anything like that. You are doing what is required of you, and that is very, very important. And all of these terms, like you are required to do this, these sort of terms that we use now, I require you to act accordingly. These sort of terms, very powerful legally, because they define what it is that we are.
Another interesting one is the word includes, Mark.
Yes.
I think you and I have
Yes.
spoke on this as well, haven't we? Because if it says it includes this, that, and the other, what it actually means is that it excludes anything not in that list, and people don't read it that way. But that's what it is, or what I believe it is, in legal.
Yes, there's a great thing called the negative averment, which is very confusing at first. And I think we should talk about that after the break, because it's a fantastic thing to throw into these letters to these land pirates. But I think Tony's going to have a little break now. We're going to put on a couple of songs or tunes or symphonies or operettas, whatever he fancies, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
This is Windows on the World live on a Sunday night, and we're broadcasting from autonomousmedia.net. You'll be able to pick up the pods on YouTube or windowsontheworld.net. Welcome back to Peter and Mark. And we're going to continue with, what was it, Mark?
Oh, we were talking about a thing called a negative averment, which actually sounds really complicated. But what it's about is you're putting forward a scenario where they have to prove that they didn't do something. It's not that you're accusing them of something particular. They have to prove that they didn't do something. And that's incredibly difficult to do because it covers everything. There's loads of things they have to bring into it. So you could say there is no evidence you did not intend to defraud me by not complying with the Bills and Exchange Act, and it's believed that none exists. It sounds really complicated, but you'll find some examples of that on Windows on the World, and it's incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly powerful to use in affidavits and in legal documents because it even gives lawyers a headache. And once you get your head around it, it's one of the most useful and amusing things because they have to prove that they didn't do something, which is very difficult to do because what you're doing is you're making the whole thing so broad that they have to cover every single angle, and you can keep going after them. So that's something that I think is really useful for a bit of fun, and I think it's important to have a bit of fun with this stuff, and I think that's what Pete's website's all about, really. It's beyond fear. It's not really, when we're talking about these sort of fines, the charges, they're not fines because they're not from a court, as Pete quite rightly said, but these charges that they're laying on you, I mean, it's all small-time stuff, and I've been dealing with it for many, many years, and the thing is, with the whole system of administration, it's massively fraudulent, it's badly organised, and it's not really going to end. In the worst possible case scenario, property is stolen through the county court by government organisations and people who are generally just bent. That can happen. But when we're talking about just these sort of fines, you can sort of learn a lot from it because legally you can really sharpen yourself up. And people go, oh, what do you mean legally or lawfully? I say, well, the thing is, we're talking about the law here, but the law operates within a legal framework. So what we're doing with this remedy is we're using their legal framework to impose law. And that's very, very powerful, isn't it, Pete?
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And you say we're having fun with it because the fun side of it starts to displace the fear. When you get that thing drop on your mat, you pick it up and butterflies hit your stomach, and you do have that fear response. And now I look forward to it happening. I love that stuff coming through my door because I just enjoy it now because I've totally taken the fear of it away. It doesn't scare me. That's how bullying has no effect, is when you're not scared anymore.
That's exactly right.
Knowledge dispels fear. It's an old old saying in a lot of the military world. Knowledge dispels fear.
Yes, I mean, this stuff, it's interesting the way it goes through phases as well with these so-called debts. It's a slightly different subject, but it's related because what would happen with these sort of things is they get sold onto debt collectors. And what they'll do is they'll sell it off to somebody who's fairly vigilant to start with, because they probably paid a few more pennies on the pound. And as it goes down the scale, because the debt doesn't exist anyway, as we know, it can't really exist. They sell it on, and it ends up with a company like Moorcroft in Stockport, who just phone you up. And it's like, once it's reached that level, I think even they know that it's over, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally concur with that.
Yeah, it's very funny. But the way these things are worded is quite interesting, because they use points of law. They'll say, under such and such an act, we can do this. Yes, you can, but not for what you're asking me for. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. There was one that they were using all the time. I think some Dutch company, actually. Very, very funny. And they said, basically, we can break your door down under this act. Well, they can under that act, but that act doesn't apply to what the piece of paper says. Do you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
That's a really good, and it's a clever thing. I mean, it's very clever when they do that, because obviously they have lawyers working for them, so they're quite sharp on their paperwork. Some of this stuff is quite cleverly laid out, but it's clever because it's legal, but it's deceptive, isn't it?
I haven't found very clever lawyers and legals in the parking side of things.
No, I think we're barrel scraping there a bit.
They're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Yeah, really.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're not even much of a challenge for a reasonably intelligent person who knows how to read. And that's basically what I don't offer legal advice. I offer lawful opinion. You come to my website, you read it, and you get on with it. I do not offer advice. Get on there, read it, and make your mind up if you want to go with it. If you do go with it, the only advice I could say is stick with it.
Well, exactly. I mean, the thing is, when you find a remedy, do stick with it, and that's the main thing, isn't it? Because we found this years ago. I mean, that thing that I went to court for was quite interesting, because it was a thing called the SPD validation form, which they still send out. So basically, if these spies that work for the council think that you may have third-party mail going to your address, they send you out a form which you're obliged to fill in, and they say it's a council form. Well, it says head of revenues and benefits on one side, but on the other side there's a barcode, and it seems to be a different document. So I found out that it wasn't actually the council that sent it, and it's a fraud. So basically it's a third party called Data Tanker, a data mining company based in Nottingham, and I think they're part of Experian. Experian are quite involved with all this, and so what they're doing is they're creating this controversy that you have to give the third party all this information about yourself, and they then do a private investigation into you. And if they think that you're not the only person at your address, well, how would they know? They live in Nottingham, right? They're from Nottingham. How would they know who's at your address? Then they make an assumption, and they were charging you £360 as a fine a priori in a civil contract. You can't have that. It's a civil contract. You can't have predetermined liquidated damages in a civil contract. So I went to court over it, because what they'd done is they'd taken away the council tax discount of 25% on the back of an assumption. And they can't do that because it's an entitlement, right? The 25% discount for sole occupation of a property is an entitlement. It's not a benefit. It clearly says it's an entitlement. So they took away an entitlement on the back of an assumption. I went to court, and the council were there. They were absolutely furious. They brought a barrister in, which cost them about $2,500. Yeah. And we did it in front of a district judge. But the reason that came about was because I went to a council tax liability hearing, and I saw the magistrate, explained it to him. He said, this needs to go in front of a district judge. The district judge said, well, he's given you a statutory declaration and says he's the sole occupant. So what's the problem? Why does he have to use your paperwork? That was the question. Why did I have to use the paperwork which could create a fraud? Which did create a fraud, because he said it was a council document, and it wasn't. And it was creating fraud through the priori, which was the predetermined liquidated damages fine. So the judge realised exactly what I was doing, and he didn't like the F word. They don't like you using fraud in an administrative court because fraud is criminal. So it's a lot more serious. So he acknowledged that there was a fraud. He certainly acknowledged it, but he didn't want to bring fraud into the court, which was fair enough because we're there to get a remedy, weren't we? So he didn't have to go accusing the council of fraud and going, this is criminal, going to the High Court. So what he did was he looked at the form and he said, well, you've given them a statutory declaration. You've told them you're the sole occupant, which is all you're liable to do. You don't have to do anything else because, of course, previously the council just sent you a form every year and said, are you the sole occupant still? Are you still sole occupant? Yes. Ticket, send it back. That's all they need to know. That's all they're obliged to know. They can't get a third party in to investigate you because your contract, if there is one, and we're not going to get into all that because it's boring, because there is a contract under it goes back to the poor laws, the parish and all the council stuff, which we've talked about from about 1200 onwards, and I feel like I've been talking about it from 1200 onwards, so I don't want to go into that. But the judge turned around to the council and he said, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to photocopy one side of the form and I'm going to get you there, Mr. Windows, to sign the form and then give it to the council. Would that be acceptable to you, Mr. Windows? And I said, yes, as it removes the controversy, meaning the fraud. And he said, exactly. And the council were absolutely furious. And that means that form does not have to be filled in by anybody in the country. But it got much funnier than that because Newlands wouldn't accept the new council tax bill. They still were operating on the liability order that they'd been given before the court case. So I went out and accused Newlands of fraud. They gave me letters which were without prejudice, which means I couldn't use them in court. They were starting to panic. And this was where it got interesting because I said to them, OK, this has been resolved in court. I accept that you are now creating a fraud. This is extortion. So show me the liability order. And they said, the council have got it. Wrote to the council. They said, Newlands have got it. I said, well, can't you both have it? I mean, if it's a liability order, you must both have a copy of it. Went very, very quiet because there isn't one, is there? And that's the point. So with all this stuff, it's about remedy. And
even if there is one and they've lost it, it's a procedural impropriety.
Exactly. Well, yes, I went into all that. It was on a website called landofthefree.co.uk, and I think that website's gone down now. I might get it put back up, actually. It was a friend of mine who was doing its body gone out of date or something, but some really good information on that site, and I had it in great detail. I went into great detail with it, and that's why I find this stuff, to me, it's a little bit tedious now, but for people coming into it, especially with these things, that these parking eye charges and all that, very, very useful because it sort of empowers you. Oh, that's the word we hear a lot, isn't it? It empowers you. Probably makes you more diverse and vibrant as well, I would think. And it means that you can take these companies on, and it gives you a bit more confidence because then you can build on that and go, well, that worked. I'll look into this a bit more. It gives you more of an interest in it. So that's how we started off, really, was like looking into things on this sort of scale. And then it takes you on a journey into other things, and you start looking into the law, what it's about, and where to apply yourself and where to not apply yourself, because that's very important too, because a lot of this stuff can be a complete waste of time. So what you need to do is maybe just concentrate on what's really important. And of course, these charges that are laid on people are very important, and they need to be defeated. And Pete's website lays that out very, very clearly. And what I would say, though, is if people are going to look at it to actually learn what it's about and understand it, you don't have to understand all of the Bills and Exchanges Act 1882 to understand or comprehend what Pete is trying to say and what the actual thing is about within law. But it does help if you've got a grasp and understanding of what you're trying to achieve, because unless you have, then, as I said in the first part of the show, don't do it. Isn't that right, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, how many people, going back to the old Freeman on the land days, grabbed the template letters, sent them off. Some of them didn't even fill in their names in them and stupid things like that.
Yeah,
they went off half-cocked without any any background knowledge behind it. This is about it's effectively about growing up and taking control of your own life. You're not an imbecile. You don't need someone to speak for you. You are doing it for yourself. You're taking charge of your own life. But if you do that, the onus is on you to arm yourself with as much information as you can going forward. And the Bovat Remedy website is the result of a lot of painstaking research by myself and by my brother, which I've basically put into words in a few pages. So before you just rush in and grab the download, read about it, find out what it's all about, because then, when that next letter hits your doormat, you'll be able to respond to it without going through that fear response.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I remember years ago when we started doing this, I was quite reckless, really. Stopped paying the council tax and all that, stopped paying all the parking tickets just to see what would happen.
Yeah.
And then that was my way of going, okay, I'm doing it now, so I'll find my way out of it. I'll start using all different remedies and see which ones work. And we found the ones that work. And yes, the thing is with this stuff, though, it's a bit frustrating in a way, because the public whinge and whine about all this stuff, but they never want to find the solution, most of them. They don't want to find the solution. So if you don't want to find the solution in this system, it's not there for you. The solution is only there for those who wish to find it. And often those who do find it find that the solution isn't there anyway. But that's a slightly different angle. But
they think by voting for someone, they'll find a solution. Well, one of the definitions of insanity is doing something over and over again that has no effect. A bit like voting, then.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I think someone's just put a comment in.
Yeah, we've got questions in the chat room here, and one of them is looking for solutions, and they're looking for them from you two. So, what is the panel's opinion on consent? And when we see the abrogation of consent and abuse of natural rights, how do we exert a bit more government when officials insist that they can simply do what they like because they're following orders or just doing their jobs? What's the remedies in these circumstances?
One of them is to make a statement of truth. Then it was covered pretty well on Veronica Chapman's Freeman on the Land. What she was doing, she was getting them to sign. I forget what. Anyway, I will look for it now, and I'll come back in a minute.
All right, Tony. I think we addressed most of that in the first part of the show. Really, it's all about you finding the solution, and the solutions are there. Is there any part of that question that's particularly relevant to now? I'm just trying to think of because I think we covered most of that in the first bit of the show, as far as I can tell.
Well, there's some solutions here for sure. There's another question from Lee as well. When a council tax debt is passed on to a third-party collections, are they passing the debt over as a deed of assignment, as any other instrument would be transferred to collect the debt? How is the debt transferred, and is it purchased as any other debt collection agent?
I don't think it is, because what happens with the council tax, it goes back to the council, doesn't it? So the deed of assignment is probably not the right instrument to do that, because I think what happens is the council, as far as I can understand it, is they have a contract with the bailiff companies to collect the council tax on behalf of the council, so they're not selling the debt, so there wouldn't be a deed of assignment. So there's a contract for the bailiff company to collect the council tax, and the bailiff companies who are most effective at collecting the debts are the ones that the council employs. So this is another side of it that's quite interesting, because this is where you're getting these old people being terrorised by these thugs from groups like JBW, who went in very, very cheaply, and basically they employ these people who are self-employed, and so they're getting very little money. For instance, JBW Group, a few years ago when I looked into it, were getting £7 for a walking levy, which is basically when they come in and take your stuff. So they're getting £7 to take all someone's gear to pay a bloody council tax debt, and that's where it's gone wrong, because what the councils have done is employed these companies on a contract, and that means it's all about efficiency. So it doesn't matter how these people get the money, they just want the money, and that's the problem. So if in actual fact what happens, I think, with historic council tax debts is they do get sold on, but not for quite some time. And the other thing about all that is that often the accounting's completely wrong when it goes to these bailiff companies, because the council's accounting is usually inaccurate. So the whole thing is bad news. And with council tax, we went through the whole thing from beginning to end. And yes, but it's a scam in many ways, but it's a different type of situation than other fines, because it goes down to the poor laws and the parish council. The powers of the parish council goes back to the certificate of settlement, which it came out in the 1500s during the time of Henry VIII. I think the certificate of settlement came out, which is now the equivalent of the passport and the national insurance number. So if you wanted to move from one place to another, you have to have the certificate of settlement. So the parish council had an extraordinary amount of control over you even then. And that's where it really comes from. It comes from this implied liability that you are their property. And that's something we've gone into before. People can argue about that, but that seems to be the way it works, because you can't get imprisoned for a fine usually, but for council tax you can, only if you go along with it, however. But what they've done is deregulate it so much. So you've got someone like Marston's coming round saying, we've got an arrest warrant for you. No, you haven't. You've got a bit of paper that you printed. And that is a fraud, because the police have nothing to do with it. However, we all know that they are part of the same brethren, so they will assist each other, and that's where the trouble starts. You've got the police joining in with these private debt collectors, these so-called bailiff companies who aren't bailiffs, because if they were bailiffs, then they'd be fair with you. They'd say, oh, okay then, so you can't afford to pay. Is there anything we can work out? Can we work something out? And of course that means you get into a contract with them. But most of these companies are remote, and they're issuing just things that have been printed on a computer, as we know. So that's where it all goes wrong. And it goes back to liability again. But the thing that Pete's been talking about is a beautifully simple idea which can defeat part of this problem and a growing part of this problem, because this parking on private land thing is pretty serious stuff, and people now are shopping more and more at supermarkets, so they're going to get hit more and more with these kind of tickets, and even where people live, like you, Tony.
Yep. Being extorted we are all around here. I think Pete's back with his info now. Is that right, Pete?
It was pretty. When I went and looked at it, it was pretty much following the line of Bovat anyway. What you're doing is you're making a conditional acceptance and really just saying, well, put your money where your mouth is and put your signature to it. And that's basically what we're doing with the Bovat notices. We're just saying, well, all right, you say there's a bill, put it on paper, tell me what and where and why and how I owe it, and sign it under full penalty of perjury. Okay,
thanks for that. We're going to get back to this parking thing now and my situation, because as I told you in the break there, and some people have heard before, this is an ongoing thing. Mark helped me out with it a while back, and we were successful. There was no fear involved from my part, because I was quite convinced that I had no obligation whatsoever through the things that I'd already read and learned over the years. But I didn't know exactly how to deal with it in the easiest way. But without giving me any legal advice, Mark sent me some stuff which I kind of messed about with just a little bit, and sent it off to see what would happen. And my letter simply said, your client has failed to respond to my request for a valid invoice. Please supply details of your legally qualified officer responsible for your own paperwork received by myself. Please supply all relevant information of their legal qualifications by return of post. Please inform your legally qualified representative officer that I require a valid deed of assignment from your client regarding the matter by return of post. Also, please notice that there is no legal deficiency in the case law Dunlop versus New Garage in relation to this matter, and it believes that none exists. If you supply the requested information and supply a valid VAT invoice as required by law, I will respond accordingly. And I sent that back to the enforcer some 6 months ago, and I haven't heard a word since. So
did that go under the title of a notice, or did you send it as a letter?
Just as a letter. No notice or anything.
It's a lot harder to ignore if you send it as a notice, a legal notice.
Yeah, I've been looking at your forms today. What I've downloaded looks good there. I see the notice and that's all on there. And I sent this just in the post as well. I didn't ask for a signature, so I wouldn't advise anyone, obviously, after listening to you two tonight, to do that themselves. And I'd advise them to get probably the fuller scope, but it just goes to show that once they do know that you know something, then they're likely to just disappear. Well, in my circumstance anyway.
Yeah, I think that letter or notice, it is a notice really, that's what I wrote it as, a notice, really covers everything, and that's what Pete's things does as well. I think it's good to cover that, the deed of assignment, put that in, and on all the other stuff that was covered in there will really hit them. And
I think I want to talk with you, though, Mark, a bit more about what you said earlier, and I might try and find some way of incorporating that into the BOVAT notices, because it sounds pretty powerful to me, and it's another string to our bow, isn't it?
Well, it is, and that's why I sent that to Tony. There's about 4 or 5 things. It's basically like a list of remedies I sent, and when that goes to their legal department, they're going to go, who wrote up this this letter we're sending out to ask people for money? Was it done by a lawyer, or was it just done by a clerk? Because if it's not legally sound, there's also a problem there, and that's a great thing. I find one of the best remedies for anything is asking someone if they're legally qualified, because a friend of mine, I think we've mentioned this before about Joanne's car getting clamped, and it was in one of our trusts at the time, and I told the guy he was trespassing on trust property and time, and it was my time and property that he was trespassing on. It was trust property, but the property was to be used by myself to convey myself from one place to another, and that was incurring costs, £160 an hour. And he then said, well, I think this and I think that. He gave me a load of opinion. He gave me his opinions. I wasn't asking for his opinions. Yeah. And then he started quoting things as though he was a lawyer. So I said, are you legally qualified? And he said, well, no. I said, well, you've just given me legal advice. He goes, well, I'm quite entitled to this. I can do this. I said, no, but you've just given me legal advice. You've given an unrepresented member of the public legal advice, which is 7 years in prison. And it went very, very silent for about 3 seconds. And he said, well, I think, I said, I'm not interested in your opinion. I'm interested in the law. And you've just given me legal advice. You're trespassing on a trust. And there are very severe penalties for that. And they don't know about trust law, these people. They start waffling at you because they know a little bit of the law. They know statutes that they use to enforce their...
Or they know a sentence or two in a statute that they use to enforce.
Exactly. Yeah. They know a quote from a statute which they use. But they don't know the framework of that statute, and they don't know the meaning, usually, and how that meaning can be interpreted and applied. So to cut a very long story short, the clamp was off within 10 minutes. And even I was surprised. But I think it was the fact that he'd given me legal advice that worried him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, that. But with this stuff, I think because we've been doing it quite a long time, I'm a little bit jaded with it now because I found out how to do this stuff, and I would recommend it to anybody because it's very, very empowering. That's to use the Agenda 21 and, the New World Order words. Probably makes you a bit diverse and a lot more vibrant as well. But I would suggest that people do it and go to Pete's website and start learning, because this stuff it's very, very satisfying. when you find a remedy and a solution, and there really isn't very much need to get overhyped and worried about this stuff. To me now, after going through much more serious stuff and looking into more serious stuff, I don't even really look at it much anymore. But it's very, very handy to know, because it sets you off on a journey that if you prepare yourself properly and become competent and not just send things off. I mean, Pete's website is brilliant because you can download the notices, but understand what they are, look into it, look into the case law, Dunlop versus New Garage, stuff like this, because that's what the Parking on Private Land Association are now trying to say doesn't apply to them. So all of a sudden, case law doesn't apply to these group of businessmen who own a bit of land between them. Do you know what I mean? It's absolutely incredible, isn't it? The law doesn't apply to them anymore.
Yeah. Well, the law applies evenly or not at all.
Yeah, everybody's equal under the law and no one's above it, according to our ancient form of history, but and our ancient form of historical legal system. But who knows? I mean, it's all gone to absolute fraud now, so it needs to be pointed out. Have you got anything else you want to say, Tony, on this?
No, I have got a question from the chat, though, if you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Okay, can Mark or Peter speak about using the words wish and will, and have they used them successfully?
Not I. I don't know about that, sorry.
Well, things are down to words. Words create magic spells, don't they? But I think that there's may and must and all these things. I think that really it's not so much the individual words as the framework of what you say. I mean, the thing is with legal language is what's great about it is you can put something down incredibly succinctly that means a lot. Phrases such as you are required to act accordingly. That means you are required to act within the law accordingly. There's a lot of stuff like this that is very good to put into these letters and notices, and the negative averment being one of them. There is no evidence you did not intend to commit fraud, and it's believed that none exists. It's almost impossible to prove that you didn't intend to commit fraud under those circumstances and that broad a concept that you're outlining there. So all of these things have a great amount of weight. And I think that the original Freeman thing, there was some good ideas in there, but it all goes down to what we're talking about here, administration and legal fictions. Like, so go to the court and say, I'm not the legal fiction. Well, what you're doing here, we only want the legal fiction. It's administrative court.
Yeah.
We don't. Your flesh and blood. Well, what's that got to do with bits of paper? We work with statutory instruments in here. We're not interested whether you're living or not. It doesn't matter in this court. It's for administration. So in those sort of courts, you need to just get all of your stuff written perfectly and competently, and yes, economic with language, but very precise language. And that's the beauty of it, really, with this sort of administrative law, if you can say that it's a beauty to it. There's a beauty in the simplicity of what you can put into your documents. And that's what I found really absorbing. And I used to spend hours and hours and hours putting these documents together and these responses, and then go back and checking it and taking a few words out and maybe re-emphasizing something. Well, that's because I like doing that sort of thing. I like writing. I love the economy of words. I like editing things. And
I love that.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. What most people do is they throw in their opinion. Never put your opinion in. Your opinion's not necessary. Who wants your opinion? No one asked for that. What they asked for is the legality and the law of the actual system that you're working in. And the problem that most people have is they don't understand the system they're working in. Well, that's no wonder, because we're not taught anything about it. We're not taught it in school. I mean, school's absolutely useless. It should teach you law. It should teach you where you stand within society and what you are. But if they did that, then the rest of the system wouldn't work as successfully, because people would be dissatisfied, because they'd realise that most of it is based on fiction. It's not really about anything that's tangible. Commerce is about just conveying fictional amounts or fictional entities. This is the thing that people have a real problem with. This is why that the banking system isn't explained to them, because they don't need to know about it. As the judges say, they say it's not in the public interest. It's not in the public interest for you to know about it. You don't need to know about it. That's why it's not in the public interest. Not because that the public should or shouldn't know about something, or there's any merit to the case. People think that not in the public interest means that there's no merit to it. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that you're not meant to know about it. Destabilize society. It's not in the public interest. It's not in the public interest for you to know this stuff. You need to be there as a revenue stream. You're going to get looked after. You have liabilities, and we have certain liabilities to you, but that's where it ends. We don't want you getting involved in stuff that you needn't know about. You need to know about this stuff. You're not taught it. There's no reason why you should disturb yourself with it. You have duties and liabilities. We put fear of God into you, so you pay us all the money that you earn, so you can't become rich and powerful like us. And that's in the public interest. It's not in the public interest for them to have loopholes. I mean, heaven forbid, we'd have more and more people becoming elites, wouldn't we? Or we'd have more and more people becoming superior with knowledge. And of course, then where would we be? Oh, we'd have to start forming secret societies, wouldn't we? I think that's what's maybe the future is. Stop broadcasting and start meeting in secret. Well,
that takes us. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah. It's just something I've been thinking about recently, which is quite funny. In other words, that people go, it's secret societies that run the world. No, it isn't, because the secret societies that they're talking about are all over YouTube. So how can they be secret?
That's right. Well, that kind of took us round into a circle to what Lee added to his question. He says he asks because kings used to use phrases like, it's the king's wish, or it's the king's will, and he then adds, now, if we were all kings. Now, what I thought that he was talking about in this question, or asking about, with wish and will, were what are known as sibboleth words with more than one meaning, which is often used in legalese, which can often trip people up in court cases. Am I right or wrong?
Well, you've also got to be careful, because words are also defined within each act. So words that you think might mean something, or might have one meaning interpreted in Black's Law Dictionary, they might also be defined within the act to have yet another meaning. So always be careful of that. Words are important. Words are all we have.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that the difference between wish and will, I think, in the context he was talking about, was if it's the king's wish, the king would hope for this to happen. However, it may not happen. It's the king's wish that this should happen, but that means there are things in the way that may stop that. I wish for this to happen, but that wish may not come true. I think what that means. But when it's someone's will, it means that it's their testimony, and it will happen, because a will is a testament. Your will is your last testament. So in the case of will, I think that's what they mean. That's quite interesting, actually. You brought that up.
Statement of intent, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it's the king's wish. Well, there may be elements within a parliament, or there may be elements out there that will stop the king's wishes. However, the king's will is absolute, and that has to happen because it's stated as something that can and will happen. It will happen. Yeah, interesting one, that. Good one.
Yeah,
like
thanks.
That. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Lee. Anyone else got any questions, or if there's any that I've missed, please post them again, because I have missed them. It's been pretty busy in the chat room there today. Thanks for your contributions. Where are we going next, Mark?
Well, we're going to probably wrap this up. I mean, I think it's been quite an interesting show, actually, Tony. With today's show, I had a great feeling of weariness about the whole thing, because I thought, are we going to address this Parsons Green thing? And I started looking at it, and it just filled me with boredom. And I know that's a terrible thing to say, but if we've been reduced to little bags with builders' plastic buckets in being left on trains, and basically to an 18-year-old kid and a 20-year-old kid have been caught by Kent police, and the whole thing, I suppose it's I suppose it's interesting in some ways, but it was just the consequences of them saying we're going to shut down the internet on the back of that, So someone's left a little bag with a bucket in it that seems to set on fire and is allegedly very dangerous, and that's going to close the internet down. We are in the post-truth world. None of this makes any sense anymore. And again, it just goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the show. It's always good to go full circle, but I think that's part of what we're talking about. I mean, we're trying to get things down to reality. Reality is tangible, and reality can be brought into the ether, into actual concrete decisions and an actual conveyance of property. And that's what I think is really interesting about this stuff, is that it gives you exercise and able to exercise your own control over your own situation. And all of this other stuff we can't control. We have to watch it unraveling and getting ever more ridiculous in the post-truth world. But with the things that we're talking about, there are remedies. And that's the thing. It's like the version of reality and unreality. We've fed all this unreality, but within these sort of constructs that we live in, there are actually remedies. And that's what we've been talking about tonight, really. And those are what are important to me. The sort of ongoing terror games and the terror clowns on the street and all the rest of it is really turning into a bit of a distraction, because all it's there for is to take away our rights. But conversely, what we're talking about is actually enforcing our rights. And that's a good word, isn't it? Enforcement. We hear that. Enforcement's usually what is being done against us.
Yep.
But what we should be doing is enforcing the law against these corporations and anyone else who gets in our way. And if more and more people did it, then it would probably be a good thing, because it would actually force the system to actually change a little bit, because the system adapts to these sort of threats. It does adapt to them. And the way it adapts to them is either to accept what we're doing or get more draconian about it. And if they get more draconian about it, then they get more opposition, or they can get more opposition, because I don't think a lot of these draconian measures are ultimately going to work that well. They're very good at creating fear, but I don't think ultimately it's really ever been part of a historical narrative that's lasted for very long. What do you think on that, Pete?
Yeah, tyranny seldom survives a couple of generations, if you look at it historically. A thing I thought of while you were speaking there was something I've used before on posts and Facebook and what have you. And it's an analogy, like what we're doing here is these people operate in the shadows. These people operate behind closed doors. These people operate in secret a lot of the time. And if what we do drags them into the light, it's a bit like dragging the vampire into the light, because you're destroying their power.
That's absolutely right. And that's what those notices do.
Because they are bloodsuckers.
Yeah. Well, it's the power of words, isn't it? It's like we were saying at the beginning. You're basically... You should always act as though you're under oath, because these people never do. And if you are acting for a higher power, then it removes controversy and you can deal with things in a much more straightforward way, because what our public servants do especially is they don't tell the truth. They respond to you as though you've asked a completely different question than you did ask them in the first place, diversion tactics. And then they also put in things like, I'm sorry you feel that no, it's nothing to do with feelings. The way I feel about it's got nothing to do with it. This is law. This is requirement. This is responsibility. This is your liability. And what you've done is said that it's the way I feel about it. Irrelevant. Why are you bringing up the way I feel about something? What's that? Feelings have nothing to do with the law. No one's got the right to be not offended either. So again, yeah, it's a very interesting one. That
turning everything into feelings is very cultural Marxist, though, isn't it?
It's completely cultural Marxist. Yeah. It's about disempowerment. It's like oh, I feel I've got hurt feelings.
Yeah, everyone's getting hurt. It's emotional everywhere. Every platform where you look, it's just all emotion, no logic at all. Drives me crazy.
That's what we were talking about at the beginning, isn't it? It's like the post-truth world, you know. Yes, it's like a situation in which people are more likely to accept an argument based on their emotions and beliefs rather than one based on facts, post-truth. So basically, what you should accuse these people of is living in a post-truth world. If they say, I'm sorry you feel that, say, I'm sorry that you're living in a post-truth world. However.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. I've just got a new tool in my arsenal.
Well, it's some of these things just trip off the tongue. But I think the funny thing about this is if you frame things in a certain way, they sound as though they're legal maxims, you know.
Yeah.
There's a few comments in the chat room that sort of like go in hand with what we were saying on Barry Prince's show the other day. Trump's appeal to shut down the internet because of this strange bucket bomb. And people saying in there that they created bigger ones themselves when they was kids, as did we. And there was no internet then, because when I was that age, it was a long, long time ago. And we could do some pretty amazing things with just... saltpeter, sugar, sulphur, and fireworks as well. We used to do all sorts of amazing things. And,
we used to make saltpeter bombs, in school.
And sausage rods with bangers and copper pipes and things like that. All sorts of crazy stuff.
That's right.
If you're listening at home, kids, do not do this.
No, it is dangerous.
Do not do this.
One of my pals did find out. He loaded up a Costello cigar tube, I believe it was, into a bit of copper pipe, and he filled it up with all sorts of nasties. And I wasn't there at the time. I'm glad I wasn't. But he lit it, and when he was running away from it, it went off, and it filled the back of him with tacks and ball bearings and all sorts of things. So he thought he was safe out in the woods where he was, but he weren't. Not safe from himself anyway. So don't do it.
Exactly. That's the problem, though, isn't it? You know, I mean, but yeah, it is ridiculous to use this, and it's kind of absurd and bizarre that it was in a little bag, and it's just the whole thing it's ripe for comedy, even though we shouldn't be laughing at it, you know. But when you see the PR that the papers put out, it's so ridiculous, and that woman with that silly bandage around her head it was modelling, you know. We know these crisis actors exist and all the rest of it. We could go and analyse this for weeks on end, but what's the point? There's going to be another one next week, so you know, it's just an ongoing.
Probably the same crisis actors in it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then trying to compare it to 7/7. I mean, 7/7 was a sophisticated operation which killed 52 people, and that was very, very well planned. Not well planned enough. If you've read Nick Collestrom's book Terror on the Tube, as the train that the bombers were meant to be on didn't run, which meant that the whole narrative got thrown out. But when we get this sort of thing, it's like, is this
all the underground footage got lost?
Yes, but maybe we should call this Terror on the Cheap.
Yeah.
You know?
I think Jack summed it up pretty well. We called it comedy errorism.
Yeah, that's a clever one. I like that. Very
I like
good.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're about done, aren't we? I'll put a tune on now, unless anyone's got anything to add, and we'll get it done.
Just a quick one. If it's bovat.org.uk, and if you go to the homepage and you read to the very bottom, you'll see next, and on the next page you'll see next. If you read through all those next and get to the end of it, then you'll probably be well armed for using the Bovat remedy.
Nice one. Thank you, Peter. That's BOVAT as in BOEVAT, which is Bills of Exchange VAT, Value Added Tax, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
BOVAT.
Yeah, I've downloaded them. I'll be using them very soon because I've got one on my table right now. So,
superb.
Cheers for that. Mark, what's happening this week? Got anything to tell us?
Right, well, just before around that, what I would suggest to people, though, is don't just use the template. Understand the template, but get to the point where you can write your own. Because once if thousands of people start sending these in, they'll start calling it a loophole, and they'll stop accepting it. So you have to make it slightly personal, and that's the only thing I'd say is keep your letters slightly personal.
Yep.
Because template letters are as bad as the things that they send to us. We have to change them slightly. What Pete's done is given you a brilliant remedy, but I would say learn the remedy and basically stick to the rules of what this is about, which is basically what they have to adhere to, but make your letters slightly personal. That's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, I agree with that, because
I totally concur. Yeah, make it your own. It's like a recipe. Take it and make it your own.
that's exactly what they done with the get out of debt free letters, and they would say you've just downloaded a template from the internet and it's not valid in law, and they were testing people to see what they know. So I've responded to those letters myself with, yes, it is just a template letter, but I do understand what it means, and so do you, whatever, and they go away after, but it's just more aggro in your life doing it that way. I agree, so yeah. Okay, right, well, this week on autonomousmedia.net we've got happy hour, 10 o'clock on Tuesday. Freeman Jack will be along at 9 o'clock on Thursday. Every weeknight, starting from Tuesday, it's 1 a.m. in the morning, is the Ocelli Effect. So there's more stuff there, and I'll be updating the player in the next day or two as well. We've got a few pods that need to go on there. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Thanks especially to those in the chat and contributing. Thanks to Peter Thomas, and thanks to Mark Windows. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Cheers, everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, everyone.
Join me, Mark Windows, with Tony Hurst for Windows on the World Live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT at autonomousmedia.net.